Okay, all good, yeah. Hi, welcome back to the channel. I've been wanting to make this video for quite some time, and every time I've tried to do it, I've kind of like deleted it and not, wasn't feeling too good about what I've done or what I've said in it. This time I actually feel more confident in how I'm going to actually approach this video and this topic, because I've just released this short video, which you can see here. And this video basically is just about me going through this a bit, kind of a day in Berlin and like filming some stuff and mostly kind of being in training transitions. So it's just a nice quick video that I wanted to make a nice edit. And for the majority of the video that you may have seen, it's mostly S-Log2, probably bar of like maybe 2 or 3 clips that were in Cine 2, I believe. And the rest was S-Log2 because I wanted to test out how that looked. Now, usually if you want to test out a log or some footage, you would actually, you'd go ahead and make like a studio setup and see how that works out for you. But I don't have a studio setup. I just have a person that films in his room. So for me, it's just kind of like, let's go film outside, see what we can come up with. And I think that's a really good idea. And previously, when I used to work with S-Log2 footage and try to actually edit some of it, it wasn't working out so well for me because I didn't grasp fully how much I can actually edit the footage, especially with me having an 8-bit camera. The flexibility you have with the 8-bit file isn't great, and sometimes you can end up with like breaking out like in parts of the image and the video. So if you actually want to edit something really well, you have to be more conservative with your edit. And I kind of learned that just throughout trying out and kind of testing things and then failing, feeling like they just didn't output they didn't meet my expectations. With this kind of footage in this video, or in that Berlin kind of journeying through Berlin video, that footage now looks a lot better. I'm much more satisfied with it, and even though maybe sometimes I feel like it could be a lot better, which it definitely could, there's always room for improvement, it's something I want to actually discuss and share with people just how I do that also with DaVinci Resolve. Now, as you may know, a lot of people do use Premiere, or a lot of people do use maybe DaVinci. For me, I feel super confident editing in DaVinci, and going through the whole process of it is actually become quite fun to me, editing and seeing how the footage comes out. The potential you can unlock from something like log footage, or if you have raw footage from DaVinci, I mean, it's endless and there's so much you can do. I don't know if there's any other more professional softwares out there that people use, but I do know a lot of them, or a lot of people use DaVinci, and honestly, for color grading is absolutely amazing, and even for editing, especially because it has Fusion built in. And if you've ever used something like a node-based editor to try and do some things, it is actually really nice. And so for me, I just kind of transitioned from using something like Premiere, going to DaVinci, just because I wanted to deal more in depth into color. Because if I do want to upgrade my setup into something that does shoot raw, I am definitely going to be utilizing something like DaVinci a lot more. Now in a moment, we're going to jump into DaVinci and see what we can do to make the footage that we're making actually a lot better. But first off, you need to know, and everybody kind of on every camera has a different way of how you set it up for your shot. And for me, if you're using S-Log2 and you're using A6400, I don't know if there's any difference with like for S-Log2 on like, let's say an A6600, I'm not very sure. But on an A6400, an 8-bit camera, let's say, S-Log2, you need to make sure you're trying to make it as close as you can to these really good settings. You want about exposure of about 1.7, like plus 1.7, like you want to just keep that there. There's loads of people that do settings. You can go check these videos out, but those are recommended because if you want to use LUT, something like a leaming LUT, that's kind of very recommended that you do actually use the settings like that. Alright, so we're hopping here into DaVinci, and over here we've got the same timeline that we have for the edit, and I just wanted to leave that here just so we can have a reference as to how things are going to go, or to compare the edit that we make to the one that I actually made over here. It's probably going to be very close, but maybe slight difference. Go into the colors over here, and the first thing you're going to notice is we have loads of stuff happening on screen. I won't go into details about everything that has to do with DaVinci. If you want a more detailed and in-depth video about that, I'm pretty sure there's loads of tutorials out there just that can give you an idea of what you should be doing. But essentially, I'll be explaining as much as I can of the process and what goes into it in detail. So over here, we can look at the waveform, and we've got the vector scopes, parade, histogram, and this to compare, the RGB kind of spectrum. We're gonna go back into the waveform, and I mainly focus on the waveform over here, especially in the beginning of the edit, because it's the place where you see how all your levels work out together and how you expand basically the log information that comes in compact into the MP4 file that you record on your 8-bit camera. So what we're gonna do with that data is, because it's now compressed, we're gonna stretch it out and make it look better and see what potential it has for us to kind of edit and go through it slowly. So for me here on my nodes, I usually start in with like about 4 nodes. I place the 4th one here and keep these 2 here, just as an organizational kind of thing. On this side here, usually on the 4th one, I put in my conversion LUT. Now you can use also effects over here. You can use a color space transform. That also works well, but there's also some really nice nodes that you can use. I personally use the ones from Sony, but you can also buy the ones Leeming LUT. They're very good, and they give you, I think, a pack that can edit HLG, Cine 2, and S-Log as well, so you're kind of covered in that regard. But I personally just use the S-Log 2 LUT that come in from Sony. You can download those for free. And over here you have the S-Log 2 Type A, which is the one I actually always use. Now here, I always keep my log conversion, and you want to always edit before your log conversion. You don't edit after your log conversion. Any edits after your log conversion is kind of like your, let's say, your look or the kind of grade that you're going for. You add in a bit of, like warmer highlights, play around with the midtones a tiny bit with the colors of them. Maybe like either warmer shadows or more colder shadows. That's up to you, but that goes over here. Anything else that comes in to fix the clip to make it look perfect, color graded properly, that comes in right here before the conversion LUT. Sorry. As you can see here, if you look at the waveform, it's expanded massively. The waveform is now expanded. We can have the full potential to edit this footage. As you can see here, we've got a lot of vibrant colors. Before that, it looked lifeless. It looked gray. So now we can look at all these colors. Now for me, I always keep the first node for any temperature adjustment, and for this clip it's well done in the camera. I already put it in the settings perfectly, so I don't need to change that. So for the second node, we go in and I start in with the color wheels, and I edit also saturation and contrast in this node. Now my my saturation is actually a bit bumped up in camera to fix a problem with 8-bit cameras that has the kind of, with the skins, there's some breakouts, and with the skin colors, you'll find in some kind of like patches of green or red. And to fix that, I think Donna did it, and also Becky and Chris pointed out that you should increase your saturation in camera, and then you can decrease that saturation in your post-production, and it works well. So there's no harm in that, and it fixes the problem perfectly. So first off, I'm going to actually decrease the gain, so we can get a bit more of the sky, and reduce some of the highlights that are coming in very harshly from the sun. So we're going to go in at 94 maybe. Yeah, that sounds good. And also here with the waveform, you can see that you can adjust some things. So you can have the low and the high, and you can adjust this. This is like my low is set to 0, but my high is set to 950. So right about that line over here. So you can adjust these, so you can always have these kind of settings that you go for, always be consistent with your edit, and know where you're actually aiming for with your clips. So that comes down to you and how you prefer to edit. So I'm gonna increase the lift a tiny bit, so we can, bring out some of the shadows, just to kind of get it higher than 0, because you can see a lot of it here is clipped, and so you can go ahead and probably 4 is here, 0.04, and I'm gonna actually decrease the gamma a bit here. Yeah, that looks decent. Yeah, and yeah, so we have a bit better depth over here to the colors that look a bit better, especially with the saturation adjustment, as you can see here. Yeah, we have, the shadows aren't too saturated, they're not too dark, and we come in here, we can actually like move that down a tiny bit like this. Yeah, that looks good. And so we have a nice balance here. Nothing's clipping over here, nothing's clipping over here. Maybe a tiny bit on this here, but those are very small points compared to the overall adjustment that we had, because before that it was kind of mostly clipped. So that's well adjusted. And for the contrast, I usually bump it up a bit close to 1.1. I don't think I'm gonna go all the way up to 1. That sounds good. That looks about right. And we're still not clipping, I believe, but I think if we do a bit of this here, that looks a bit better. You know, it's outside, it's sunny, it's bright, so it should the clip should look pretty damn bright. As well, we're gonna go in here. And for me, I don't usually play with the curves when it comes to my footage. You know, I use it for photography, but I don't use it for video, and so I just use those over here. And instead, I go to the hue versus hue here. And I've seen somebody kind of adjust that for S-Log3 and put in that these were the values, and that's how you edit it for S-Log3, so you can fix in the colors. And I kind of was like, okay, well, I can fiddle around with that and kind of mess around with it in S-Log2 and see how that looks. And for me, it also adds a bit of the fix to the breaking out the colors in the skin colors, and then also that helps me also accurately edit some of the colors, because I feel like they don't look as good as they should out of camera, really. And so if I put that actually back to how it was and we switch to the vector scopes, we can see over here what we have going on for the colors. And so for me usually I go a bit down here on the red. On the yellow spectrum here, I kind of go a bit up, but not too much up, maybe 15. I'm kind of giving it like there's some. I am using this to kind of give it some warmth. I feel like it suits some of the clips, especially with the music being very kind of smooth and I don't know, just kind of like slow, nothing too, you know, actiony or something. So I felt like maybe a kind of a moodier, you know, a nice warmth to the clips would be actually pretty nice. So I don't want it to go cyan completely, but yeah. Actually, I might actually do this just because that looks very nice. And as you can see here, it is actually a bit cyan compared to this, because this is kind of the accurate color. Actually, let's just move that. This is the actual, like, how the color looks. This is pretty accurate for the color of this border. It's usually how it is here in Germany. So it's kind of cyan, so actually have to be leaning close to cyan. I think that's pretty decent over here. And then we're gonna decrease that. I like to decrease that a tiny bit here, just so our red's a bit more accurate, because as you can see, it links in all the way here to the red. It kind of loops back again. So this is my adjustment here. And then also we need to add in some sharpness, because I always it's kind of preferred by a lot of cinematographers and people that shoot video to add sharpness later on in post instead of in camera. Now, the last thing I do is this. I usually do this for the entire clips. If I go to a timeline here, you can see I have a node here, and this is my grade. Usually I kind of give a grade to the entire thing, because I'm kind of you know, equalizing everything over here. I'm fixing the grade. Everything looks really nice and good. It's color graded well. And now if I'm adding a touch or kind of a character to the clip, I'm usually adding it to the entire timeline, because I want it to all look a certain look and give it a nice you know, well balanced look together, all as clips. When I turn it on over here, you can see it adds in a bit of like colder shadows, warmer highlights, and it kind of got a bit green on the midtones, but not too much. Everything, as you can see, is like just adjusted a tiny bit. I don't go too much with my adjustment, because if I do go too far with my adjustments, you can see here, it doesn't look bad necessarily. You could go for that look, but I feel like it's a bit too cold to be in such a clip like that. So I kind of want it to be a kind of a minor grade, and it looks good. And I also don't go too harsh on my highlights, because the highlights will then start looking like this and you're blowing them out basically. So I always keep it, you know, a touch, you know, just a tiny bit in that direction, kind of make it warmer, and then the midtones just to kind of add in a bit of character. It's not much of change, but it's there. So if you compare the clips, both of them, as you can see here, that's the clip, and that's our edit right here. As you can see, it's pretty close. It's not too far off. I think the only thing maybe would be here. Yeah, so there's some more adjustments that I've done, I guess. Not in this one though. Yeah, so over here, so 0.94 minus 0.01 and 0.05. And I think we were pretty close to that, if I recall correctly. Yeah, so I kind of guess I went a bit more kind of brighter, which makes sense a bit, you know, going a bit brighter. I'd maybe leave at 0.4 here, so you know, not to blow out these kind of, you know, colors over here. But yeah, that looks pretty close. Again, the hues may be a bit different, like just a tiny bit. But yeah, that's my adjustment to this specific one. We can also see here, I like this part of the clip, because if we go back to our kind of, actually remove the LUT over here, you can see that's how the vector scope looks and the waveform looks like that. You can see there's a lot of potential for colors, but if you go here, and just to see how we expand our, you know, waveform, and that just tells you how much, you know, it packs in the data for you over here. And yeah, if I would go to kind of edit this clip very quickly, very briefly, I think I would go a bit like, no, actually our highlights are pretty good. I actually would leave them as, you know, as they are. I would, however, lift the clip a bit, and yeah, add in, yeah, that gamma adjustment. That looks pretty decent. Actually, I'd go a bit higher like this, yeah. And then, you know, with our contrast, actually I'd like a bit more contrast on this one. Well, actually here, actually, yeah, that looks decent. Yeah, no, actually this looks good. And then our saturation, bring that down to 4.7. That looks good. And then if you go over here, the same things we're gonna do. Actually, let's just do the sharpening really quickly. Go back over here to our hues. And remember, this is autumn. This kind of was November. So we are going to have some really nice autumn leaves here, with some of them being also still green. So, you know, adjusting this here to 13 looks good. This looks about good. So you can see now the autumn vibes kind of kicking in. You can see the colors over here. If you go look at that pile over here, that looks about right, because before this it kind of looked, there's some green here, but realistically it's kind of like, you know, a bit more brownish, as you can see. You just want to bring out some of that color in there. Yeah, so if we kind of go back to fit, sky will be adjusted the color of it in a second when we do this. And then actually we can go into our vector scopes. Yeah, and that looks like a nice sky to me. And maybe, and no, actually that's too much. Yeah, this is decent. And then bring that in a tiny bit here. So that van has a really nice red color. And yeah, that looks, I think that looks pretty damn good. And if we compare it to, I don't know which clip it is actually. Yeah, that looks very close to what we've been doing in the clips so far. And so if we go back here, yeah, that looks pretty close. So yeah, that's kind of the process that I use to edit in DaVinci. I don't think it's too complex, a bit minimalistic. The only thing maybe complex about it is maybe this, the hue versus hue kind of curves. I don't know how much of that you know, a lot of people use for editing in DaVinci, but for me, I find it works well, and it gives me control over the clip and how I want the vibe, or let's say the atmosphere of the clip to turn out to be like. And of course, if you have a camera with more depth, say 10-bit, or you have something that shoots raw, you'll see more detail here in the scopes. You'll see, you know, something more expanded, and you'll have more flexibility in your edit. So yeah, but for 8-bit, you know, it's kind of a challenge seeing what you're able to do, what you're able to pull off from the footage that you have at hand. So yeah, there you have it, guys. That was my process in editing inside DaVinci Resolve. I hope it was useful and you were able to take something from you know, viewing how I edit my footage. I'm sure there's many different ways of going about editing footage, but with the kind of limitations that you have with 8-bit, not storing enough data and not being able to manipulate it as well as something like 10-bit or RAW, I think this is still a pretty good process, and that you can actually come up with very, very good results, as you can see in the footage that we edited. So if you did like this video, consider dropping a thumbs up down there, or a thumbs down if you didn't like it, if you disagree with my editing style. And if you did like what you saw here in this video or the previous videos that I do have and would like to see more in the future, do consider subscribing to the channel. And yeah, I hope to see you all on the next video. Goodbye.